Once, in a land nestled between the mountains and the sea, there was a Zen master named Haruki, known far and wide not for the power of his words, but for the stillness of his presence. People said he could hear what your soul was saying even before you spoke. His monastery was hidden deep within a grove of flowering trees, a place where time seemed to slow and the noise of the world faded like echoes in a dream. One misty morning, as the sun filtered softly through the leaves, a young woman named Asha arrived at the gates of the monastery. Her eyes were red, not from the wind, but from the grief she carried in her chest, like a stone that never grew lighter. A monk greeted her, bowed, and led her into the garden where Master Haruki sat beneath a cherry blossom tree, sipping tea. The air was fragrant, the silence so complete that the sound of each falling petal felt like a whisper. Without lifting his eyes, the master spoke gently. "Tell me, child, what burdens you?" Asha hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly as she knelt before him. "I have lost someone I loved more than life itself, and I cannot let them go. My days are filled with longing, my nights with memories. Every breath reminds me of what I no longer have." The master nodded, as though he had heard this pain 1,000 times, and yet honored it as if it were the first. "Grief," he said, "is the price of love. And love, when true, never really leaves." But Asha shook her head. "Everyone tells me time will heal, but time has done nothing. The ache only grows deeper." Haruki placed his teacup down and stood, beckoning her to follow. They walked through the garden in silence, past trees heavy with fruit and flowers blooming despite the cold edge of the coming autumn. He stopped near a rose bush and plucked a single blossom, red and full. Holding it in his hand, he turned to her. "What do you see?" he asked. Asha looked. "A rose. Beautiful. Fragile." Haruki closed his fist slowly around the rose, thorns piercing his skin. Blood welled, but he did not flinch. "And now?" he asked again. Her eyes widened. "You're hurting it. And yourself." The master opened his hand. The rose was crushed, its petals torn and its fragrance lost to the wind. "This," he said, "is what happens when we hold too tightly to what was never meant to be held forever." They returned to the wooden porch, and he invited her to sit beside a small pond where koi fish swam lazily, unaware of the sorrow in the world above. "Letting go," he said, "is not forgetting. It is remembering without clinging. It is loving without grasping. It is honoring what was, while still embracing what is." Asha looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "But how, Master? How do I let go when everything in me wants to hold on?" Haruki pointed to the pond. "Do you see the reflection of the sky?" She nodded. "Now stir the water." She dipped her fingers in, and the reflection broke into ripples. "That is your mind," he said. "When it clings to the past, the reflection is shattered. But when it is still, it mirrors the sky perfectly. Letting go is the practice of stilling the heart, so it can reflect life as it truly is, not as we wish it to be." For days, Asha stayed at the monastery. She learned to sit with her pain without resisting it. She walked among the trees. She breathed. she listened. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she smiled at the absurdity of her thoughts. Haruki never rushed her, never gave her rules, only gentle reminders. "Grief is a guest," he said one morning. "Let it sit at your table. Offer it tea, but do not let it unpack its bags and stay forever." One evening, while watching the sunset paint the clouds in hues of amber and rose, she spoke again. "I realized something today. I've been carrying my sorrow like a badge, thinking that if I let it go, it would mean I never truly loved him, that moving on would be betrayal." Haruki looked at her, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "And now?" he asked. She smiled through tears. "Now I see that letting go is not betrayal. It's the final act of love." Before she left the monastery, the master gave her a small wooden box. Inside was a single dried flower, a rose, pressed between two sheets of parchment. "A memory," he said. "Beautiful, but not to be clung to. Let it remind you that love, like flowers, must be given the freedom to bloom and fade." She bowed deeply. "Thank you, Master." "Go now," he said, "and teach others not how to forget, but how to let go with grace." Years passed. Asha became a healer in a nearby village. People came to her, as they once had come to Haruki, seeking peace, seeking meaning, seeking relief from their grief. And always, she would begin with a flower and a story, and the quiet wisdom of a Zen master who once taught her that the greatest act of love is to let go. Letting go is not the end of love. It is the beginning of peace.